Imagine a book that doesn't just tell stories but is itself a source of evil. This mystical book holds ancient secrets that can change the fates of entire nations. Every leaf whispers of lost souls, curses, and horrors that must never be revealed. The sashes of the window opened with a clatter so that the glass rattled. The wind blew into the room, shaking the sheer tulle curtains. There was a desk by the window, on which papers and books were piled in disorder. The wind played with the pages of an open book, and the papers flew around the room. Suddenly it was quiet, and the book was left open on a page with a gruesome image of a monster. Shuffling footsteps were heard in the darkness, and an old man entered the room. He closed the window with an effort, and looked at the book. The old man recoiled in horror and felt the room grow cold, as if it were not summer but January. He was not alone. There was someone else in the room. The old man took a step towards the door, as suddenly an unknown force threw him into the wall. Invisible fingers clenched on his throat. The man flailed his legs helplessly, but something lifted him higher and higher. He dangled in the air, unable to scream. Short of air, the old man wheezed and opened his eyes one last time to see the enemy. Only he saw nothing. Invisible fingers unclenched, and he collapsed on the parquet. The old man's breathless body was left lying on the floor. At that moment, a gust of wind blew open the window with such force that the glass shattered. Sharp splinters fell on the windowsill and the floor. Everything went quiet. The apartment was dead silent again. "Hello, Nadia?" The woman's voice was familiar. "Yes, who is it?" Nadezhda couldn't wake up. It was barely 5 in the morning. "It's Cornelia Lvovna. Remember me, baby?" "Oh yes. Of course I remember. I called you Aunt Corey." "That's right, girl. How are you?" The woman's voice was nervous, even frightened. "Everything's fine. What's wrong? You didn't just call me at 5 in the morning, did you?" Nadia got up and went into the kitchen, where the first thing she did was turn on the coffee machine. "Your grandfather, he died," Cornelia said quietly. "What? How?" The woman's heart clenched with pain. "It happened yesterday. I managed to find your number. Grandfather had it in his book." Nadia was surprised. "So I asked the police to look through the book. Evidence, they say." "Wait, what does the police have to do with it?" "Ivan was murdered," the police said. "Broke his neck. Can you make it?" "Yes, of course, I'll book a ticket. When you arrive, come see me. My apartment is sealed." Saying goodbye to Cornelia Lvovna, Nadezhda poured herself a full mug of coffee and stared out the dark window. Strangely, the dawn was still not coming, although it was almost 6 in the morning. Soon it became clear why. Dark gray clouds loomed over the city, portending a thunderstorm. Nadia sank into the memories of her childhood. Nadia's parents were scientists, like her grandfather. One day they didn't return from another expedition. They had sort of disappeared in the forest. The search had yielded nothing. Nadia was 4 years old then, and she almost did not remember her mom and dad. Nadia's grandmother died long before she was born. From close relatives, she had only her grandfather, Ivan Stepanovich Gonchar, historian, scientist, archaeologist. He was famous and respected in certain circles. Ivan Stepanovich was engaged in the study of beliefs and religions. He traveled a lot around the world, collected legends and all sorts of stories related to the religion of different peoples. Later he studied only the history of witchcraft and witches. All over the world he found evidences and facts proving that magic and witchcraft existed in reality since ancient times. If the Holy Inquisition had not destroyed a huge number of women with paranormal abilities, now there would be real witches in the world, not charlatans. Unfortunately, there are more of the latter in the world than there are real witches. In recent years, Ivan became maniacally obsessed with searching for the shrine of all witches, the Black Grimoire. He had to leave the real science because not everyone liked the old man's work. Nadia grew up in a huge apartment full of books of different subjects in different languages. At first, because of her age, she did not understand much, and then she began to think of her grandfather as a crazy old man. They began to quarrel often, especially when the grandfather once again left on a search and returned in an agitated state. Nadia didn't know where he got the money to travel or to live a good life in general. One day, they had a big fight, and the girl packed her things and left. By that time, she had just finished school. She had some money, saved from her pocket money. She went far away to a town where she didn't know anyone. She managed to enroll on a budget, was given a dormitory and a scholarship as an orphan. She chose a specialty as far from history and religion as possible. Law. How she survived all 5 years is worthy of a book, but she managed. She made it through and got back on her feet. Over time, she began to earn good money, bought an apartment. They had reconciled with her grandfather not so long ago. They talked smoothly, without much detail. Nadia kept meaning to visit her grandfather but never found the time, or was it just that she didn't feel like it? And this morning's call with the news of his death. Nadia didn't notice that an hour had passed, the coffee had long since gone cold, and she hadn't touched it. She was still wandering in her unhappy memories. Pulling herself together, pushing away the grief, the woman ordered a ticket for the next flight to the city of her childhood. Her hometown met her with pouring rain. She took a cab from the airport, looking out the window, marveling at how the city had changed over the years. Many neighborhoods had changed so much that she didn't recognize any. Everything was built up with new housing complexes and shopping centers. Her hometown yard was still the same, which made her happy. The old lime tree by the playground, the flower beds by the entrances, almost everything was the same as it had been in her childhood. Yes, many people had changed wooden frames for double-glazed windows. The house was old, built from the institute where her grandfather worked. The apartments in it were huge, with winding corridors. Nadia went up to her floor and noticed a piece of paper with a seal on the door of her grandfather's apartment. The apartment was sealed. She called the apartment across the hall. "Nadia, you're here!" Cornelia rushed to hug Nadia and almost forcefully dragged her into the apartment. Cornelia and Nadia's grandfather worked together, and the apartments were on the same floor. Cornelia's husband died a long time ago, committed suicide. Nadia did not know the reasons. Cornelia had no children and treated Nadia as her granddaughter. As a child, she bought her presents, went for walks in the park, and taught her a lot. With Ivan Stepanovich, they were very friendly, especially in recent years. When Nadia left, she cut Cornelia out of her life too. Cruel, but she couldn't do it any other way. "You'll stay with me for a while and then we'll see," Cornelia said as she made her guest comfortable. The old woman's apartment was no smaller than Ivan Stepanovich's, with fresh repairs and furniture. Nadia was surprised at the renovation. Where did an old woman get such money from? "Tell me, what happened to Grandpa?" Nadia asked when they were settled in the kitchen. "I don't really know. I found him. In the morning I went out to take out the trash, and the door to the apartment was ajar. I thought, what an old bastard. He'd gone to the store and hadn't locked the apartment. I tried to close the door, but something was wrong. I had a bad feeling. I walked around the apartment, no one was there. Then I went into the study and there was broken glass everywhere. The window was broken. And Vanya's lying on the floor dead. I called an ambulance and they scolded me, saying, why did they call an ambulance to a dead man? Cornelia sighed sorrowfully. I thought it was a heart attack, but the police said his neck was broken. The body's in the morgue? Yeah, they won't give it to me. They say it's not a relative. Well, you're here now. Tomorrow I'll do all the work. Today I'm exhausted. Nadia shook her head. In the morning, Nadia went to the police, from there to the morgue, and to the funeral agency. At the police station, she had to talk to the investigator who was in charge of her grandfather's case. Unfortunately, we have no evidence. There's practically nothing, it's just another cold case. The investigator tried not to look at Nadia. It doesn't work like that, there has to be something. Nadia raised her voice. We searched the apartment, made inquiries at his former job. Nothing. Maybe someone snuck in through the window, killed the old man and left just like that. What's missing? That's what you're going to help us with. I don't think so. I haven't been to the apartment in years. The woman shook her head. Well, at least try. It's unlikely that anything has changed over the years. Cornelia would be more likely to help. The neighbor? She said everything was in place. So... Cornelia refused to go with her. The apartment was very quiet. All the clocks stopped at the same hour. 3:30. Yes, almost nothing had changed in the apartment. Except that there were modern appliances in the kitchen and a rather powerful computer in the study. The broken window panes were still lying around and all the surfaces were covered with a thin layer of fingerprint powder. As the investigator had said, they found nothing interesting in the computer, just his work. Nadia walked to her nursery and sat on the bed. Grandfather hadn't changed anything over the years. Everything remained the same, and for a moment, it seemed to her that she had returned to the past. Her grandfather would come in and call her to dinner, and then they would play chess. That was how they spent most evenings when things were still good. The woman burst into tears, giving her grief an outlet. She cried for the death of the closest person, for unspoken words. Nadia went to the bathroom and washed her face with cold water. Her mind cleared up. She decided to get her things from her neighbor. "Baby, how are you alone in there? Aren't you afraid?" Cornelia wailed. "One should be afraid of the living," said Nadia, pulling the suitcase into the stairwell. "I think, if the ghost of grandfather will appear, it will not do me harm." Cornelia stood in the threshold with her lips pressed together. She nodded and left for her room, slamming the door loudly. "Offended," Nadia whispered. "It's okay, we'll talk later." Suddenly she felt cold. Opening her eyes, Nadia stared into the darkness. When she breathed, steam came from her mouth. Her body paled. She was suddenly afraid. She didn't believe in ghosts, it was the darkness that frightened her. It was as if not a single streetlight was burning in the street. Reaching out, she flicked the switch on the desk lamp in the headboard. There was a dry click, but no light came on. Had the fuses been blown? Outside the window there was a sudden rumble of thunder that shook the glass. Carefully getting out of bed, Nadia slowly walked out of the room. Her feet instantly froze. The apartment was really Arctic cold, and outside the window thunder rumbled and lightning flashed. "It can't be like this. It can't be," whispered Nadia. Her feet led her into the study. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, making Nadia freeze in fear. Right in the middle of the room stood a creature that remotely resembled a human. The lower part was male, but the head was that of a goat. The creature's eyes blazed with hellfire. "Who are you?" Nadia whispered, and she thought she was screaming. The creature sniffed at her. As if paralyzed, she stood still, trying to remember a single prayer. Suddenly, an invisible force threw her back into the wall, the creature's hands reaching for her. "This is a dream! Wake up!" she screamed, pinching her arm with force. The creature grabbed her arm, and Nadia screamed in pain. The pain was so intense that she passed out. Giving the address to the cab driver, he said the price was twice as much as usual, because it was out of town. "I won't be waiting for you there," the man told her on the way. They arrived at an old cottage village. That's right, her grandfather had a dacha here, but they rarely came here. The cab drove away quickly, leaving behind exhaust fumes. The village was quiet, no dacha owners in sight, no dogs barking. It was as if the village had died out. Nadia found the house at once. Her memory did not fail her. The small but solid house stood at the back of the plot. The yard was overgrown with man-sized weeds, and everything looked neglected, as if no human had set foot here for a long time. Although there was another entrance, from the side of the forest, so to speak, a back door. Maybe grandfather had come in through the back door. The spare keys were still in an old hollow tree. Once upon a time, the two of them had come up with this hiding place together with Grandpa. The keys didn't look rusty or old, quite the opposite. Grandfather knew she would get here. What was he going to tell her or show her? The house smelled strongly of dust and mice. There was only one place to look for treasure, the old furnace. The stove had once been heated with coal, then gas was introduced and it was no longer needed. But the stove itself had been kept because of the beautiful tiles that adorned it. The cottage, like the whole village, was old, from Soviet times. Sneezing from the dust, Nadia pulled out a weighty package wrapped in a rag. A book? Judging by the shape of it, it was a book. We had to get out of here. It was a pity the cab driver had left. Putting it on the table, she carefully unwrapped the cloth and stared at the book. As a child, she had seen a lot of old books and knew that some could be dangerous. Nadia gingerly touched the cover with her fingers and immediately yanked her hand away. It seemed to her that the leather the book was bound in was as warm as a person. Touching again, she made sure of it. The leather was warm and smooth. She shuddered at the hunch. Examining the book, she noticed the lock. Clearly the lock was not simple. "I wouldn't advise you to do that, child," came the voice of Cornelia Lvovna behind me. "Aunt Corey?" Nadia was confused. "What are you doing here? Think about it. I was just following you. I knew you were a clever girl and Vanya could only leave her to you." The old woman sighed heavily and sat down in a dusty chair. "I don't understand anything. What is this book?" "Yes, you found the book but not his letter." "There was a letter?" "Of course, but I took it before the ambulance and the police got here. That's why I called you. I didn't know your childish games and the letter was encrypted. So I had to call you," Cornelia answered. "I'm really sorry. You're going to explain what's going on. I take it it's about this book?" "Yes, it's ancient, but I don't think it's expensive," Nadia snorted. "You're an idiot. Baby, this book has no price and there are people who would do anything to get it. Did they kill grandfather?" "No, Ivan didn't talk about the book. Only a small circle of people knew about it." I'm the only one left alive, and now you. Ivan was killed by a demon, the old woman said calmly, looking intently at Nadia. Demon? Are you sure you're okay? I'm already doubting it. Nadia shook her head. There was obviously something wrong with the old woman. Of course it's a demon. It will kill you too because it obeys me. But since you led me to the grimoire, you deserve some truth. Grimoire? The one my grandfather was looking for? Oh, you remember. Yes, and he found it. You know, when life backs you into a corner, you look for a way out. To escape. You want to live. Your grandfather studied magic and witchcraft in the academic sense. He didn't practice it. A true scholar. Do you know where he got his money from? He found a treasure, a real treasure, and he was able to sell it. Profitable. Enough to last him 2 lifetimes. But money was the last thing he cared about. It helped him in his work. Material wealth to which all aspire, he was not interested. In the end, his goal became the grimoire, the holy book of all witches and sorcerers. Actually, there are several grimoires. This book, one of the most powerful, and he found it. It took him years and a lot of money, but he found it. I found out about it by accident when I came to visit one day. When I saw it, I realized, this is my salvation, life extension. But Ivan was a stubborn ass, wouldn't even let me touch her, kicked me out. We had a big fight. I don't know if you knew that Ivan and I were practically in the same business. Only he was just researching, studying. Then I started practicing over time. I first used the spell almost 40 years ago. Practice and knowledge gave me a great deal. I can get almost anything except health. That knowledge, the spells, are in this book. Yes, it was I who summoned the demon and sicked it on your grandfather. You would have been next, and my assistant was a little hasty. You had to find him, and you did. After that scandal with Ivan, he came to me one day, saw something, and almost threw his fists at me. We didn't speak after that. When I came in that morning, I found a letter to you, but the grimoire was nowhere to be found. That's when I realized he'd hidden it. I couldn't spend much time looking for it. I don't have much time. I'll leave the book and just go. I'll leave town tonight, Nadia promised. No baby, it doesn't work that way. If a demon touches you, leaves a mark, he'll take you anyway. Even at the North Pole, he'll find you anywhere, Cornelia replied. For a moment Nadia thought that the old woman was truly sorry. Why are you doing this to us? Grandfather always loved and respected you. I thought you were my family. My grandfather rejected me and condemned me. Only you could have led me to the book. What do you need it for? Haven't you played the witch yet? Do you know what's worse than losing your youth? An old woman with her eyes fixed on a woman, losing your mind. And I don't want to end up in an almshouse with all this knowledge and skill. Then conjure up some brains for yourself. Don't be rude, baby. It's not that simple. That's why I need the grimoire. Cornelia grew sad. The room was quiet. It was getting dark outside. The weather's getting worse. It's going to storm again. It's always like this when he comes, the old woman said in a mundane tone. Don't hold a grudge, girl. We'll all be there, just alone before. Cornelia stood up heavily and walked towards the exit. They talked in the darkness, which seemed alive and moving. Nadia froze with horror, forgetting the old woman. With her hand she found matches on the nightstand by the wall. Grandfather always liked order, and it helped her now. There was always a lamp and matches here, just so long as they didn't get damp. She struck a match and lit the lamp. It smelled of kerosene. The room became brighter, but the cold filled the room. The old woman stood in the doorway. She waited. A shadow appeared on the wall, as if woven from darkness. A clawed paw reached out from the shadow and grabbed Nadia by the throat, lifting her above the floor. The woman gasped, unable to resist out of fear. Suddenly, a voice sounded in my head, painfully familiar. Grandfather. He repeated and repeated words in an unfamiliar language, trying to get through to his granddaughter. Nadia involuntarily repeated the words that sounded in her head. The grip on her throat loosened and she was thrown back against the wall. Jumping to her feet, Nadia grabbed the book and pressed the lock. Barely had time to remove her fingers. A needle with a shiny end popped out. Poisoned. The book was no ordinary ancient folio. The pages of the book opened on the page by themselves.